I'm a superannuation insurance lawyer, as Linda said, and I've been doing talks on these sorts of issues for people with chronic illnesses for 25 years now, so a long time. And it's sort of amazing that superannuation insurance type issues and Centrelink type issues, like particularly disability support pensions and New Start, come up a lot, are an issue for people with chronic illnesses. Chronic illnesses affect you in all sorts of ways, but depending on what chronic illnesses we're talking about, they affect certain people, a lot of people during what would otherwise be their working lives. And the way they often play out is that they can affect your ability to work short, medium or long term, right? Believe it or not, this sort of stuff I'm going to talk about is relevant to you. You probably all have a bit of an inkling of that. But my guess is you don't know all the detail around it, and you don't know about what is an incredibly fluid area of the law and is an incredibly fluid area of financial services and products and rights and all that sort of stuff. It's a really, really changeable area. And a lot of it would fly completely under the radar and you'd have no idea about it. And if you do hear about it, then you probably don't understand it or pay much attention to it anyway. So, for example, in around about May this year, you would have got a letter, or a lot of people got letters from super funds telling them that their insurance was going to be switched off. Did any of you get any of those? Yeah? And a lot of people got them, and I bet you didn't really understand what it was about. My guess is you thought, oh, well, if I've got insurance, but I'm going to lose it unless I do something about it. That's correct, but the question is, what could you do about it? Should you do anything about it? What other insurance have you got? What super have you got? How should you deal with it? And there was a big kerfuffle about it when it happened, because a lot of people got these letters. So what it did was it applied to anybody who had a superannuation fund that was what's called an inactive fund, which means it had no money going in, no contributions going into it for at least 16 months. And the law changed in February this year so that any inactive account, nothing in it for 16 months, and a few other bits and pieces, that had insurance cover in it, that insurance cover would get switched off on the 30th of June this year unless you said, I want to keep it going, right? Some people got these letters, but a lot of people didn't because they'd moved address. And if a super fund, if you've got, say when you're in your 20s, you pull beers in a pub or you waited tables, you're probably in a super fund called Host Plus, which is, those ads on TV, Super of the Future. Or if you stack shelves in a supermarket, you're probably in a fund called Rest. But if you've moved on to do something other type of work, you're probably not in that fund now. You're probably in a different sort of fund. Like if you're a lawyer, you're probably in a fund called Legal Super. Or if you work in admin, you're probably in a fund called Care. If you work in a hospital, you're probably in a fund called First State Super. Or Vic Super if it's a government fund. So or one of the retail funds, a BT, and one of the bank ones, etc. So, but if you had this old account with Host Plus because you pull beers in a pub or waited tables, if you did that in your 20s or whatever, and then you moved address, you bought yourself a house, moved address, you were renting at the time, you moved address. If you didn't tell the fund that, then they would have lost track of you, right? So they would still be trying to send stuff to you, but so long as there's more than a certain amount in the fund because there's these lost super rules about small inactive accounts, then the fund would keep going. And if the fund kept going, then it's still got, under most funds, not all, or some funds, not all, the insurance cover keeps rolling on so long as there's enough dough in the fund. Because the way insurance in super works is that if you've got a employment super fund, your employer pays the 9.5% into the fund. The trustees take out a couple of bucks a week and they pay it to an insurance company they've got a dirty big insurance policy with, right? And that insurance policy might cover give death cover, which is usually a lump sum, what we call TPD, total and permanent disability cover, which is also a lump sum, or income protection, which is a monthly payment thing, usually for 2 years, sometimes for longer. And also terminal illness cover, which is usually the equivalent of death cover, right? So if that money, they're attached to most employment super funds, not all. So in varying amounts, different types of benefits. But it doesn't come for nothing. It's not for nothing. It's paid for by premiums deducted from the dough paid in or your account, right? So if you've got this account-based cover, if you stop paying premium contributions in because you're not working in that industry anymore, then the cover still rolls on so long as there's enough dough in the fund to cover it, right? But along comes this change that happened at the start of this year, and that cover was going to be switched off on the 30th of June unless if you got the letter, unless you contacted the fund and said, I want to keep the cover going. Now, a lot of people had trouble contacting funds. I don't know if anybody tried to do this. A lot of people had trouble contacting funds. That the funds had mixed messages about whether you could do it on the phone to someone, or whether you had to do it online, or whether you had to fill in a form. And so there was that sort of level of problem. The biggest problem, though, was a lot of people didn't get these letters at all because they'd moved address and they hadn't told the fund that. And therefore, the fund had complied with their obligations, but you didn't get the letter, right? And then if you are overseas at the time, you didn't get the letter. If you are Indigenous and you live in a remote community and you don't have a fixed address, you didn't get the letter. So there's all sorts of problems. And then there was problems with the letters themselves. So they were all different. Some of them were most of them were good. Most of them were sort of like a couple of pages long and were fairly simple in explaining what was going on. But some of them were not. Some of them were really long and full of graphs and stuff like that. And then some of them, there was a bit of, some of the regulators were annoyed with some funds because they thought they were pushing people into taking a particular course of action, which was usually to elect to keep the cover going when they weren't supposed to do that. They were simply supposed to inform people of their right to do it and then leave it to them, right? But as I say, and the other big problem was the cut-off date was the 30th of June, is the end of the last day of the financial year. So super funds in the lead up to the end of the financial year traditionally get smashed because people are trying to make voluntary contributions and stuff like that into super funds because their accountants have told them to do it. So they get completely inundated anyway. And then they had this cohort, there was something like 3 million letters went out to people, right, for these inactive accounts. So they were getting absolutely caned and their phone lines melted down, their online stuff melted down, all this sort of stuff. It was just a mess. So that was what happened then. And I'm telling you that because if you've got a blood cancer, if you've got a chronic illness, this insurance cover is important. It's important to you because the way insurance in super works, it's designed to top up the amount of money you've got in your super for retirement. And it's designed to top it up if your working life is cut short because of a disability or death, right? So the government says your employer must pay 9.5% of the equivalent of 9.5% of your salary into a super fund because that then has to accumulate in superannuation and save over the years so that when you retire, you're going to have enough to live off in retirement and you're not going to be dependent on the government first for the age pension. That's the theory behind it. But if your working life is cut short, medium or long term because of a chronic illness, such as a blood cancer, then you won't have enough dough to live off in retirement, right? And that's why these insurance benefits are designed to supplement that, to top it up, to give you that. adequate retirement income. That's the theory, right? And it works reasonably well, except that generally speaking, people don't have enough in the insurance cover to do that, right? And sometimes the way that works well is that if you've got multiple accounts, because if you've got one of these inactive accounts that I talked about was switched off, right, and you're in the employed workforce, you've got another fund as well. You've got one that your current employer is paying into. You as a hospital worker is in First State Super, right? But you still got Host Plus. First State Super's got these insurance benefits in them as well as Host Plus. And for the lump sums, at least, for the total and permanent disability, you can have more than one claim. You can have 2, 3, 4. I've got one lady who had 7, which has finished her 7th claim. And
John, can I ask you a question? So you can claim off multiple
Yep.
of your insurances
Yep.
at the same time, or
Yep.
consecutively at the same time?
Well, consecutively arises, I won't go to, it's complicated, but consecutively arises if you've got different dates you stop work and you had different insurance cover cutting off at particular points in time. That's a bit, it's lawyer speak for speak to someone, get advice, right? But the key thing is you can have multiple claims, right? And so therefore, if you can have multiple claims, you don't want to do anything to bugger up the insurance you've got in super, right? So even on these inactive accounts, like the ones that the letter went out on, you want to be aware of that because it's a trigger point to preserve that, to keep that going, because it can provide you with that extra dough to live off in retirement if your working life happens to be cut short, right?
Because one of the suggestions often is you hear it in the media is to roll over your funds. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah. That's,
You don't do it for
not
two
paying
reasons.
extra admin fees and all that extra stuff.
Yeah.
Then what you miss out on is the subsequent.
I've been doing these talks for 25 years. For the first 10, we used to say exactly that. Oh, yeah, if you've got half a dozen funds, roll them over because you're paying half a dozen lots of admin fees. Put them all in one, right? But that was before the days, before in super funds moved to this continuing account-based cover. So the likes of Host Plus, for instance, it was in the early 2000s, they introduced this thing where if you stop working in the pub, even though you stop working, even though the contributions stop being paid, your insurance cover will continue so long as there's enough dough in the fund. It's called account-based cover, continuing account-based cover. That's the NAF phrase for it. They moved to that in the early 2000s. So from then, you wouldn't want to roll over Host Plus because when you roll it over, which means you take it out of Host Plus and put it in your current employment super, because there's no dough in the fund, the insurance cover cuts out, right? So you don't want that to happen. So do not roll it over. I'm telling you, using that as an example, this letter that came out for inactive accounts. And I'm using that as an example because there's another one coming down the pipe, all right? And that is for accounts. There's two. Another change in the law happened in September this year. And that change in the law was if you're under 25 years of age or if you've got an active account of less than $6,000, your insurance, you don't get insurance on that until you hit 25 or your account hits $6,000, right? And there's going to be another one of these things where if you've got an account, if you're under 25 or you've got an account that's less than $6,000, the insurance is going to be turned off again. It's going to be another one of these turned off exercises. And the time frame for that is by the 1st of November, which is like 3 weeks away, the funds have to identify everybody who's in that category. By the 1st of December, they have to write them the same sort of letter as happened in May this year. And the switch off date is the 1st of April next year. If your insurance cover gets switched off on the 1st of April and on the 2nd of April you have a relapse and then you don't have insurance cover, right? Because the relevant date for these insurances is injury or illness to prevent you from working. So it's calculated as of the date you last worked. So if your insurance cover was switched off on the 30th of June for your inactive account and you stop work after that date, then that insurance is is you can wave it goodbye. If you did stop work before that date, you're still in, right? So this insurance works like insurance on your house, right? You've got to have insurance on your house the day it burns down. If you stop paying insurance premiums the week before it burns down, you've got no claim, right?
Just ask, how do you class not being able to work though? Say you're self-employed and you've been working up until say the illness, and then it's either affected your work or you haven't been able to work since. Is that what you mean by not being able to work, or is that too tenuous?
No. This is probably the biggest question for people with chronic illnesses. It's not like you got hit by a truck and that's the date you stop work, right? If you've got a chronic illness, your symptoms often go like that. And you can have periods of time where you're off work, periods of time where you're working, periods of time where you're perfectly fine and capable of working, and periods of time where it's problematic. So the question is, what's the relevant date? Now, the relevant date, as I say, is the date you actually stop work. But then the question is, well, what am I eligible for? And there are two types of benefits, and this answers your question. There are two main types of disability benefits. One is that TPD lump sum I talked about, and the other is income protection or monthly payments. So, for example, if you're in First State Super, or say you're in Vic Super, which is the main government accumulation scheme in Victoria, you've got both. You've got death cover, a lump sum, you've got TPD, total and permanent disability cover, and you've got an income protection benefit for 2 years. For the income protection benefit, the requirement is you've got to be off work for a minimum of 60 days, 60 or 90, I think it's 60 at the moment. And you've then got to be unfit to do your normal job for the time being, right? So you don't have to be, so long as you can't work, you stop work more than the waiting period, which is your 60 days, and then you're still unfit to go back to the job you were doing, take into account your health problem, whether that's because you're under active treatment, whether you've had a transplant, whatever, or you're still crook and you can't work for whatever reason, then you can be eligible for that income protection benefit, right? The bigger benefit, which is the TPD lump sum, to be eligible for that, the usual one is you've got to be off work for a minimum of 6 months and then assessed as being permanently unfit to do the job you were doing or any other suitable work with your skills and experience. So the bar's set sort of here, right? It's income protection, you just got to be unfit to do your normal job for the time being. TPD, you've got to be unfit to do your normal job or any other suitable work with your skills and experience permanently. Now, permanency is the big thing that's hard to pick for chronic illnesses because of these sorts of symptoms and treatment and whatever. So that's a hard one to pick. But that's one of the reasons why with a chronic illness, it's really important to keep all the insurance you've got going, because it might not be possible to determine now if you're under active treatment that you won't be able to go back to work, but you don't know. You may not. Hopefully you'll get better, you'll be able to go back to work, but you may not. And if you get to that point, it's really important to keep as much of this stuff going as you can.